She carried it wrapped in a garbage bag, and the man behind the counter didn't even look up. Her family had laughed when the lawyer read it out, the contents of the storage unit. But when the senior curator at Whitmore's auction house peeled back the corner of that ruined canvas, his hands began to shake so badly he had to set it down. He didn't offer her a price. He sat down on the floor and put his face in his hands. Late October light fell in pale strips across the conference table at Aldgate & Sons, a law firm in downtown Providence that smelled like old carpet and inherited anxiety. Clara Whitson, 33 years old, sat with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap because she didn't know what else to do with them. Her coat was a dark green wool blend she'd bought at a Goodwill in Cranston the previous winter, and the lining had started to separate at the left shoulder seam. She'd safety-pinned it closed that morning in the bathroom mirror of her studio apartment, squinting in the bad light. Across the wide oak table, her older brother Roland Whitson leaned back in his chair like a man who already knew how the meeting was going to end. He was 41, broad through the shoulders, wearing a sport coat that probably cost more than Clara's monthly rent. His wife, Vivienne, sat beside him turning a gold bracelet around and around her wrist, with the idle energy of someone who had nowhere more important to be, because everywhere she went was already important. Their cousin Brent sat near the window scrolling through his phone. They were there for the reading of Miriam Whitson's estate. Miriam had been 87 when she died. In her last 4 years, after the first fall, after the hip surgery, after the diagnosis that came back with the word progressive in front of it, she had needed more than any single person could reasonably give. Roland said he would have helped more, but his firm was going through a restructuring. Vivienne said she had a sensitivity to certain medications that made it hard to be around hospice equipment. Brent said he lived too far away, which was technically true. 40 minutes up I-95, a drive that somehow never got any shorter. Clara lived 12 minutes from Miriam's house. She had been a 4th-grade teacher at Elmwood Elementary, a job she was good at and that she loved, and she had requested a leave of absence in the spring of Miriam's 3rd year of decline because there was no one else. She told herself it would be temporary. She told herself the same thing for the next 14 months. She used up her savings. She maxed out one credit card and then another. She administered medications and changed bedding and sat in a wooden chair beside Miriam's bed. During the bad nights when the confusion came on strong, and Miriam thought she was somewhere else, someone else, calling out for people who had been dead for 30 years. Clara had held her hand through all of it. Frederick Aldgate, the attorney, cleared his throat and opened the folder. He was a compact, dry-voiced man who delivered bad news the way a pharmacist describes side effects. Accurately, without particular affect, moving on quickly to the next item. Roland received the house in Barrington. 4 bedrooms, a renovated kitchen, assessed at just over $600,000, along with Miriam's primary brokerage account, which held approximately $240,000 in diversified holdings. He also received the 1987 Steinway upright in the front parlor, which Roland did not play and had mentioned wanting to sell at least twice in Clara's presence. Vivienne received Miriam's jewelry, the pieces collected over 6 decades, the pearl set from her honeymoon, the garnet earrings, a sapphire cocktail ring that had belonged to Miriam's own mother. Brent received a cash bequest of $30,000 from a separate account Miriam had maintained quietly for years. Clara felt the specific hollowness of a person waiting for the catch that isn't coming. She pressed her thumbnail against the pad of her index finger under the table and listened. "And to my granddaughter Clara," Frederick read, "for her presence and her patience during these last years. I leave the contents of the storage unit at Harborview Self-Storage, Unit 44, including all items therein, particularly the items stored against the rear wall." Roland made a sound. It wasn't a laugh. It was something more controlled than that, a brief exhale through the nose that communicated, precisely, the absence of surprise. "The storage unit," Vivian said, not quite to anyone. She touched the bracelet again. "She always had a soft spot for old junk," Brent said, not looking up from his phone. "You can probably get $40–50 at an estate sale. Some of that stuff has been in there since the 90s. Clara did not look at any of them. She looked at Frederick Aldgate, who met her eyes briefly with an expression she couldn't fully read, not pity, not apology, something smaller and more careful than either. She drove to Harbour View the next morning. Unit 44 was at the far end of the second row, a 10-by-15 space with a corrugated metal door that stuck halfway and had to be lifted with both hands. The smell when she rolled it up was the specific smell of closed-off time, cardboard, dust, something faintly chemical that might have been old paint or old varnish, or just age itself settling into the air. There were boxes. There were plastic storage bins. There was a broken floor lamp and a hat box and a card table folded on its side. Against the rear wall, wrapped in what had once been a moving blanket and secured with twine so old it crumbled when she touched it, was something large and flat, roughly 3 feet by 4 feet, heavy in the way that solid wood is heavy. Clara unwrapped it on the concrete floor of the storage unit, in the cold, her breath showing faintly. It was a painting, or rather, it had been a painting, or was several paintings stacked on top of each other in the sense that someone had clearly gone over the original surface with a coat of cheap, flat tan paint, the kind used to cover walls in rental apartments, the kind that goes on thick and dries without sheen. The wooden stretcher frame was warped at the lower right corner, and water damage had left a dark bloom along the top edge. A long hairline crack ran diagonally through the paint layer from upper left to somewhere near the center. It looked like something a person would throw away. She turned it over. The wooden crossbars of the stretcher were dark and dense with age. Someone, not recently, had written something in pencil on the back of the canvas. The graphite had faded to near illegibility, but she could make out 4 letters and a number, WHC, and then below it what looked like it might be 1887. She put it in the back of her Subaru and drove home. That night she sat across from it at her kitchen table in the apartment she could no longer afford, where the radiator ticked and the refrigerator hummed its constant low note. Her phone showed a balance of $63. Rent was due in 9 days. Her health insurance, which she paid out of pocket since leaving her teaching job, was overdue by 3 weeks. She thought about what Roland had said afterward in the parking lot of Aldgate & Sons, while Vivian waited in the Audi with the seat warmer probably already on. He'd come up beside her as she was unlocking her car door and said it quietly, with the specific gentleness of someone who wants cruelty to land softly so it can't be called cruelty. Grandma used to store things in there, just to store them. Stuff that should have been thrown out 20 years ago. I wouldn't spend too much energy going through it. He'd paused. She loved you, Clara. She just didn't always make the most practical decisions. You know how she was. Clara had said nothing. She had gotten in her car and waited until he was gone before she let herself breathe. Now she looked at the painting. The tan paint was peeling in 3 small places along the bottom edge, and through the curling flakes she could see a different color underneath, a deep, saturated blue-green, the color of old copper or deep lake water, nothing like the flat neutral sitting on top of it. She got up and found a container of olive oil in the cabinet and a cotton ball from the bathroom. She worked slowly, carefully on one of the peeling spots. The flat paint lifted more easily than she expected. Beneath it, the original surface was smooth and glossy still. The blue-green deepened as it came clear, and then the edge of something else appeared, a shape, dark red ochre, the suggestion of form. She stopped. Her hand was not steady. The next morning, she wrapped the painting in 3 moving blankets she bought at U-Haul for $12 and carried it to Whitmore's auction house on Westminster Street, which she had found by Googling reputable auction house, Providence, Rhode Island. The building had a glass front and a discreet gold leaf sign. Inside, it was quiet and cool and faintly intimidating, in the way that all places are when they're accustomed to handling things worth more than your car. The woman at the front desk directed her, without enthusiasm, to a consultation room off the main hallway. Clara set the painting against the wall and waited. The man who came in was named Stuart Okafor. His card said Senior Director of American Paintings, and he wore it like a title he'd worked hard to earn. He was in his mid-50s, methodical in his movements, with close-cropped grey at his temples and reading glasses on a lanyard. He looked at Clara. He looked at the wrapped painting. He looked back at Clara. Mems. Whitson. Clara. Mrs. Whitson, what can I tell you about today? I don't know what it is, Clara said. I inherited it. I think it might be old. I need to know if it's worth anything. Stuart nodded with the practiced neutrality of a man who heard this approximately 4 times a week. Let's have a look. He unwrapped it himself efficiently and propped it on the easel in the corner of the room. He stepped back. He looked at it for a long moment, long enough that Clara started to feel self-conscious, as if she'd brought in something ridiculous. The surface overpainting, Stuart said, more to himself than to her. When did this come into your possession? Yesterday. It was in my grandmother's storage unit. She'd been renting it since the early 90s. And before that? I don't know. Her family were from Maine originally. Her father was a merchant. She never talked much about, I don't know. Stuart reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small UV pen light. He turned off the overhead fluorescence and clicked it on. In the ultraviolet wash, the flat tan overpainting lit up in the specific way that modern synthetic paint does, bright and uniform, but the original surface beneath it responded differently. In the UV light, the age of the underlying paint was visible as a different value entirely, absorbing rather than reflecting, dense with the particular darkness of oil paint that had been drying for well over a century. Stuart turned the lights back on. He did not say anything for a while. He put the pen light back in his pocket and took out his phone and photographed the back of the canvas. He photographed the pencil inscription. Then he put his phone away. I need to make a call, he said. Will you wait here? How long? 10 minutes, please. He came back in 8 with a woman Clara hadn't seen before. Early 40s, in a blazer, carrying a leather portfolio. Stuart introduced her as Dr. Annika Reeves, their specialist in 19th century American works on canvas. Dr. Reeves looked at the painting. Then she looked at the inscription. Then she took out her own phone and pulled up an image and held it next to the penciled letters, WHC, and stood there for long enough that the silence in the room started to feel pressurized. Mrs. Whitson, Stuart said finally. His voice had changed. The efficient neutrality was gone, replaced by something careful and deliberate, the way a person speaks when they are choosing each word before it leaves their mouth. Are you familiar with the name William Henry Crofton? Clara shook her head. Stuart pulled a chair over from the corner and sat down in it, which struck her as odd because it meant he was now sitting and she was standing. He seemed to realize this too. He sat forward with his elbows on his knees. William Henry Crofton was an American painter, born in Portland, Maine in 1851. He worked primarily in oils. In his lifetime, he was considered a significant figure in the tonalist tradition. He showed in New York, in Boston. His work was collected by 2 of the 5 largest private collectors in New England in the 1880s. Stuart paused. He died in 1889. A fire in his studio destroyed the majority of his completed work. What survived was catalogued by his estate. Of the pieces documented in those records, 12 are now in museum collections. 3 others have sold at auction in the last 30 years, with the most recent, a coastal landscape, approximately this scale, going for $4.2 million at Sotheby's in 2019. Clara heard the number. She registered it the way you register a loud sound in another room. Aware of it, not yet certain what it means. The WHC on the back, she said. His inscription method. Consistent with authenticated works. Stuart glanced at Dr. Reeves, who was still studying the photograph on her phone. There is a painting listed in the 1891 estate records that was never located. It is titled Interior with Storm Light. The catalogue description places it at 38 by 48 inches. He checked his phone. A domestic interior rendered at the moment of an approaching storm, notable for its handling of reflected light through glass. He looked up. The dimensions of what you've brought in today are 37.5 by 47.75. The stretcher bars are consistent with Crofton's documented materials, and the overpainting. What about it? The overpainting was applied with a roller, which was not in common use before the late 1950s at the earliest. Someone after 1960 deliberately concealed this painting by covering it in house paint. He held her gaze. Mrs. Whitson. Before we go any further, I want to be clear that formal authentication will require time, laboratory analysis, and documentation of provenance we don't yet have. What I can tell you right now today is that if this is what I believe it to be, you are looking at, conservatively accounting for condition and the provenance gap, somewhere between $3 and $6 million at auction. The room was very quiet. Clara sat down, not in a chair, on the floor with her back against the wall, because her knees simply stopped cooperating and the floor was there. Stuart Okafor did not seem alarmed by this. He did not comment. He simply set the painting carefully back against the easel, sat in his chair and waited. "There's something else," Clara said from the floor. Her voice was steady. She was slightly amazed by this. "In the storage unit, in one of the boxes against the back wall. There was an envelope taped to the inside of a tin box. I didn't open it. I brought it with me." She had carried it in her coat pocket the whole time. She set it on the floor between them. It was a standard white letter envelope, sealed, with one word written on the front in her grandmother's distinctive slanted hand. Clara. She broke the seal. The paper inside was Miriam's personal stationery, cream-colored, with a small MRW printed at the top. Her grandmother's handwriting covered most of one side. "My darling Clara, if you are reading this, then you did what I knew you would do. You didn't sell it for scrap. You didn't leave it at the curb. You did what you have always done. You looked closer when everyone else looked away. The painting came to my father from his father, who bought it as an unknown work from an estate sale in 1932 for $11. He stored it because he liked it, not because he knew what it was. I discovered the inscription on the back in 1978, did some research at the library, and became afraid. Afraid to claim it, afraid someone would dispute it, afraid of what it would mean. So I covered it, I had it covered, and put it away, and told myself I would deal with it later. Later became never as it does. I considered leaving it to Roland. He would have sold it immediately, without knowing what he had or caring to find out. That felt like a kind of violence. I considered leaving it to no one, donating the storage unit contents in bulk. But then I thought of you, the way you sat with me in the dark when I didn't know where I was, the way you never once made me feel like a burden, even when I know I was one. The way you look at things, Clara, really look. You earned this, not because you were patient, because you were present. All my love, Grandma. Clara read it twice. Then she folded it along its original crease and put it back in the envelope. "Are you all right?" Stuart asked. "I don't know yet," Clara said honestly. She was still on the floor. The authentication process took 11 weeks. During that time, Clara borrowed $700 from a colleague who didn't ask many questions, paid her rent, paid her overdue insurance, and went back to substitute teaching 3 days a week at Elmwood while she waited. She did not tell Roland. She did not tell Vivienne. She told no one except the attorney she hired. Not Frederick Aldgate, who had represented the Whitson family estate, and therefore Roland, but a litigation specialist named Diana Cho at a firm in Boston that had handled 3 high-value estate disputes in the last decade. Diana was methodical and calm and expensive, and worth every cent of the retainer Clara paid with the advance Whitmore's extended against the authenticated value of the work. The call came on a Thursday afternoon in February, while Clara was eating cereal at her kitchen table. Stuart Okafor's voice on the phone was precisely controlled, but she could hear underneath it something that sounded like barely managed excitement. The laboratory analysis is complete. X-ray fluorescence and infrared reflectography are both consistent with Crofton's documented technique and materials. The wood in the stretcher bars has been dendrochronologically dated to before 1880. Pigment analysis matches his authenticated palette. A brief pause. Miss Whitson, interior with storm light is real. We'd like to discuss scheduling. The painting sold at Whitmore's spring auction for $4,800,000. Roland called on the Monday after the auction results were published. Clara was in her new apartment, 2 bedrooms, a clawfoot tub, on the east side of the city near the park, when his name appeared on her phone. She let it ring through to voicemail. Then she listened to the message once. Roland speaking in a low and tightly controlled voice about the possibility of a legal challenge on the grounds that the storage unit contents should have been included in the primary estate valuation, that there may have been a misrepresentation, that he had an attorney looking into it. Diana's response, delivered to Roland's attorney the following morning, was brief. It included a certified copy of Miriam's handwritten letter, a copy of the original estate documents confirming the clear and unambiguous bequest to Clara, and a politely worded note explaining that Roland had, in fact, received the estate he was given. The Barrington house, which currently carried a $68,000 lien from an unpaid contractor dispute, Miriam had never resolved, plus the brokerage account, which had dropped 18% in the quarter since his inheritance due to a sector rotation, Roland had not anticipated. The Steinway had been appraised at $4,000, a number Roland had reportedly found insulting. Clara never heard from his attorney again. She went back to teaching in the fall, full-time, her own classroom, 4th grade again at Elmwood. On the wall behind her desk she hung a framed print, not expensive, just a print, of a tonalist painting she'd found in a book about the period. Her students occasionally asked about it, and she told them it was by an American painter who had been almost forgotten, and that sometimes things that seem lost are just waiting to be found by someone willing to look. She kept Miriam's letter in her desk drawer at home, in the cream envelope with her name on it in that slanted hand. She took it out sometimes and read it, not because she had forgotten what it said, but because some things deserve to be read more than once.